Hey, you guys. He did it again. So this time the word that I got was about the perfect storm. And if you think about what we're going through right now with this pandemic, it is definitely the perfect storm because not only are we affected in our jobs, we are affected in our families. And it's not just us, it's the world that's affected by this pandemic. The economy, financial structure, the school structure, the churches. It's a perfect storm, which is very poignant to think about it because what we're dealing with right now is a perfect example or opportunity, rather, for many of us to fall away in our faith, for many of us to give in to fear and anxiety. And so let's see what the Lord let me know this morning. He brought to mind two scenarios. One scenario was in Matthew 8, where Jesus was um, where he was in the boat with his disciples and he was asleep and a storm arose and Jesus was still asleep. And the other scenario was in Matthew 14, where Jesus was, he had just finished with the 5,000, feeding the 5,000, and he went away into the mountain to be alone. And he sent his disciples on to go to the other side. And a storm arose and they were on the water for a while. Jesus saw them when the evening came. He saw them, according to one account. He saw them, and even though he saw them, he didn't go to them right away. He went to them, it says, in the fourth watch of the night. So, what he was showing me with these two examples, or two scenarios, is that in both scenarios, the disciples showed fear. The storm was raging around them and they showed fear. But what he also let me know was that in the midst of both of these storms, he was there. He was there. And he let them know to not be afraid. He said, "Do not be afraid. I am with you." Also, in both of those scenarios, he said to them, "You of little faith." Because even though he was with them, they still showed fear to some extent. Now, what we're going through in the perfect storm, people are losing their lives, and people's lives are affected by the loss of lives around them. They're affected by the loss of jobs around them. I mentioned that before. People are affected in many ways. There's a movie called A Perfect Storm, talked about these fishermen that went out, and it talks about three weather fronts came in that had never happened before, and they both collided to produce this perfect storm, and they all lost their lives. All lost their lives. They said it was one of the greatest storms in modern history at the time. Now, we can say and will say more than likely of this pandemic that we're dealing with now, how it could have been, or maybe it is the perfect storm. Or, I mean, we've had pandemics in the past, but there are things that are going on with this pandemic that has not happened previously in the way people are dealing with things, or the government, etc. of this time. They're saying it's something they've never seen, and of course not, because it hasn't happened in their time. So the question to you is, will you trust him in the midst of this? Because even when they went and woke Jesus up in the first scenario I spoke about, he said to them, "Where's your faith?" Jesus was with them and he was unconcerned, asleep in the boat, even though the storm was raging. And in the other one, when he was walking on the water towards them, and they called out, first they thought he was a ghost. In one scenario, when you read it, in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when they told a story, some of them were very, very similar. But then even in Luke, it didn't even talk about it. But in John, it talks about how I believe it was John, where he asked Jesus to walk on the water and to call him out. And when he did, and the wind, got boisterous, Peter looked down and he started to sink, and Jesus rescued him. And he asked him, why did why did he stop believing? And he talked about the wind. Now, I asked God this morning, and when he was showing me these scenarios, I said to him, what is my storm? And so when I thought about it, I thought about how the storms in your life and in my life may not necessarily have the same elements. Maybe you haven't lost a loved one yet, or maybe you have, or someone that maybe you haven't lost your job, or maybe you have. Look at what your storm looks like. But even in the midst of your storm, know that he is with you. And I will say this, that a storm for me is when whatever I'm going through is throwing me off balance. That is what I know in regards to when a storm is in my life. It is something that is throwing me off balance. Is it something that is, causing me to doubt? Is it something that is causing me to fear? Is it something that is, causing me to try to do something in my own strength? Take a look at your own storm and see what it is and what it looks like for you. And then know that even in the midst of your storm, Jesus is with you. So do not be afraid in the midst of this pandemic that we're dealing with, and the loss of life, and the loss of work, and having to be shut in, and the loss of freedom for some people. Just know that he is with you, and he has the power to calm everything that's around you. And even if he chooses not to, just know that you can still be at peace when all the chaos is going on around you. I choose to be at peace today. How about you?